Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, December 23rd, Christmas Eve, and we have a great show for you today. We got to start talking about all of those first-round games that we saw this past weekend. A lot of blowouts. Let's be totally honest, all double-digit wins by all of the favorites this past weekend, but plenty of things to pull out from this, and including a couple of things about the losers that really stood out to me, and I'll break that down throughout the show. Then we'll get to some of the issues. A lot of people had a lot to say this past weekend, especially as that Indiana and SMU game are going on. I'll address that and why a lot of it is just downright ridiculous. But we'll get into that in time. We'll get into a little bit of a bowl wrap-up. It is still bowl season. Want to give some love where they absolutely deserve it. I'll lean into that. We'll go through them relatively quickly with a lot of them coming up this weekend. And then we'll do a little bit of a weekend updates. We'll do the transfer portal, coaching updates. We'll give you an update on the FCS playoffs, everything in between. So a lot of different stuff coming on today's show. And then we'll have to see you again all the way on Friday. So it'll be a little bit of a hiatus throughout Christmas. We'll be back on Friday to break down everything as we head into a huge weekend of bowl games. That'll be really fun to watch. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, get it to the top of the list, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $, add any question, comment you like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, and that's the only possible with you guys. So anything you guys want to ask, especially about the games this past weekend, more than happy to answer them on today's show. But let's go ahead and jump into this, and we'll start with that. We'll pretty much start in chronological order. We'll start back on Friday night. We'll make our way through the weekend, and we'll start with those first two games. And we got to get into this one that happened down there or over there in South Bend, Indiana. Remarkable game. One of those games that it shows what Notre Dame is very much capable of at a very high level. This defense is an absolute problem, and don't let the score fool you here. Notre Dame rolled. They absolutely dominated this game. Obviously, Indiana was able to score 2 times in the final 90 seconds of this game to make it just a little bit interesting, but overall, they were absolutely dominant from pretty much start to finish in this one. They played incredible football, and the Notre Dame defense led the way, as you would have to imagine in this type of game. Indiana had absolutely no running room all night, 2.3 yards per carry, and the coverage was just incredible. Xavier Watts is an absolute problem on the back end. If you needed that confirmed to you, it was confirmed to you on Friday night. He is absolutely incredible, and he's one of those guys that if they can play relatively sticky coverage on the back end, he was going to give you a couple of chances. He's going to make a couple of plays throughout these games, and he's going to give you a shot against a backup quarterback in Gunnar Stockton that we'll talk about in time, I promise you that, but it's going to give you a shot in a game like that where you have to go up against a very experienced back end. Definitely a thing that Notre Dame is going to be hoping they can really rely on, but overall, a lot of different things that happened in this game, and really it started with this one. The 98-yard run from Jeremiah Smith opened this thing up, and it was Notre Dame pretty much from then on. They absolutely dominated pretty much from start to finish. Still some offensive issues that I think need to be ironed out. A couple of felt a little bit boom or bust in some respects. You know, Riley Leonard would make a big play downfield. Then they would get a little bit stagnant running the ball outside of this 98-yard run. They didn't run the ball all that well. Indiana did a great job fighting at the line of scrimmage, did a great job against this offensive line. Something to think about as we get into that Georgia game. But Indiana punting at the Notre Dame 49-48, down 17 is just insane to me. Not to say, he absolutely made the wrong decision, but you need a spark. You need a big play. I get it's 4th and 11, but at the end of the day, to win that game, you're going to need a big-time play that you weren't supposed to get. That was probably the the opportunity you had. So, remarkable stuff from Notre Dame pretty much from start to finish here. Shout out to Marcus Freeman for getting his guys fully ready for this one. A little bit of a slow start, but after that 98-yard run, it was all Notre Dame. They absolutely dominated, and they move on to New Orleans. They face off against Georgia, and it's going to be a great one. It's going to be a really interesting one that a lot of people are going to pick Notre Dame in because of Gunnar Stockton starting. A lot of different questions around that one, and we'll get into that in time, probably on Friday, do a quick early look at that game. But the reasons Notre Dame won, D-line domination. I mean, it was incredible. Indiana had 63 yards on the day on 27 carries. Notre Dame had 10 tackles for loss. Curtis Work just never really felt comfortable in the pocket. Riley Mills and Logan Thomas. Wow. It was absolutely incredible to watch those two guys go to work. Even with Howard Cross being a little bit limited throughout this game, they picked up the slack and were absolutely incredible. And now you get Howard Cross back fully for the next game, and that's going to be a huge piece for that defensive front. Then they set the tone. I think the big thing in this game that pretty much everyone was talking about as we head in, including myself, was if Indiana has a shot to win this game, if they're going to be able to come out on top in this one, they have to get up early. They have to hit that first punch. They have to make sure that they get on the board early and get up 7-0, get up 14-0. The second that he went 98 yards, the second that Jeremiah Love broke away, went 98 yards for a touchdown, and covered the ball at the end, something to keep in mind for all you running backs and wide receivers out there, that was it. Truly, that was it. And it's not to disrespect Indiana in any way, but the reality is, from that point forward, they dominated. They scored 20 of the next 23 points after that score, and this game was over. And Indiana, you battled back really late. I really enjoyed that because you gave us a little bit of a second where you thought, no way they're going to be able to pull this off. They weren't able to, obviously, but it shows you just how much fight that Indiana team does have. And then tight windows just all night for Curtis Rourke. He had no place to really throw the ball where he could feel fully confident. Obviously, you have Elijah Surratt. Obviously, you have a lot of these really talented wide receivers on the outside, but when they're playing sticky coverage like that, you're not going to get a lot of openings. And frankly, I thought there was going to be openings. I thought there was going to be a lot more openings throughout this game for them to hit big shots downfield, especially in one-on-one coverage. Never really came. It was really incredible from these back-end players, particularly the corners that had to deal with number 13, Elijah Surratt. So really incredible stuff from that Notre Dame defense especially, and then just enough from that offense, especially Jordan Faison, who someone we'll talk about in time as we move on throughout this tournament. But where do they go from here? What's the next step for these two programs? We know what Notre Dame's is, but for Indiana, I'm not here to bury Indiana. We'll talk about the craziness and people trying to bury Indiana here in a second in a couple of segments, but the reality is they had a remarkable year. They came up short on Friday. They were in a tough environment. They were playing a team that physically was just better than them. They came up short. That was pretty much the end-all, be-all there. I'm still very excited to see what they can do. If they can bring in Fernando Mendoza for that 2025 season, this thing could keep rolling on with Curt Cignetti. Have a ton of respect for him. Probably did a little bit too much talking before the game, but at the end of the day, I love the energy, and it was really, really fun to watch this team throughout this year. Cannot wait to see what they'll be in 2025. For Notre Dame, you move on to New Orleans. You find your way down to New Orleans, and you got to play UGA. You do get the backup quarterback, and Gunnar Stockton. They're going to be feeling a little bit better about their chances with that, but looking for got their first CFP win here. Looking to possibly knock off that team that has been kind of the class of college football the last little bit and move on to the semis where they might just play a Penn State or Boise State team that maybe they can beat them too. So a great win for Notre Dame to start this thing off, and a pretty dominant win despite only winning by 10 at the end of the day. Then we had this one. This was the most lopsided performance of the weekend, and Tennessee gave it a run for their money, but in my opinion, this was the most glaring lopsided performance of the entire weekend, and it started very early. Kevin Jennings made a ton of mistakes in this game. He was all over the place. The defensive line for Penn State against SMU's O-line might have been the biggest mismatch of the entire weekend. It was absolute domination from start to finish. Danny Dennis-Sutton was there pretty much every time. Zane Durant was plugging up the inside like a beast. And then Abdul Carter was Abdul Carter. He was going to be a problem in this game, and he absolutely was. SMU only had 58 rushing yards on 36 carries. It's not what they're used to by any means, especially with a guy like Brashard Smith back there. That is not a comfortable stat line for the SMU Mustangs. But Kevin Jennings got lost in the mess in this one. There's no doubt about that. There were a number of mistakes that he made that he does not normally make. He obviously floated the ball in the Tony Rojas pick six, had the mistake. The third pick, to be totally honest, is just Dom DeLuca making a play. If I'm being totally honest, that was an incredible play by Dom DeLuca, and not necessarily holding that one as aggressively against Kevin Jennings, but he got caught up. It was a big moment in a stadium that he has never played in before, a stadium unlike anything that he's ever played in before. He made some mistakes on the fourth down early. That was a huge play in this one. If they hit that play, if he hits him in stride and he scores a touchdown, or barring that, if he just takes the first down that I feel like he could have gotten with his legs, what happens in this game? Does SMU go up 7-0, and then Penn State gets a little bit tight? We'll never really know. He missed him by a little bit. They made a great play on the ball, and that was kind of all she wrote for this game. Really, really incredible stuff from this Penn State defense. And as good as they were, the Penn State offense left a lot to be desired. The run game was good. They had 189 yards, 4.7 yards per carry. Drew Aller was really inaccurate in this game. Only had 127 on the day, and obviously some of that is game plan stuff, some of that is flow of the game, so not holding that too much against him, but he's going to have to play better football going forward. Maybe not against Boise State, but definitely in a semifinal matchup and absolutely in the national title. He's going to have to be a bigger piece for them, and this offense is going to have to play better going forward. So they roll on. They get to play Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl, and it should be a win, but I don't think I have to tell you about Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. We'll break it down a little bit probably at the end of the week, take an early look at that game, but the reasons that Penn State was able to win on Saturday, I'm trying to get my day straight, they opened the gap early, and this was something we talked about with the Indiana game. It was much the same thing here. If you were going to fall into a 14-0 hole as SMU, you weren't getting close in this game. Let's just be totally honest. And they fell into a 14-0 hole with 2 pick sixes. So the crowd was into it. Everything was moving in Penn State's direction. They go up 28-0 at halftime and then coasted to the finish. They absolutely handled business, did exactly what they were supposed to do, and it really helped that they got up 14-0 very early in this one. And then line of scrimmage control. This was something that we felt like Penn State was going to be able to do. SMU's done a great job throughout the year of being able to run the ball and everything, but the reality of the matter is Penn State's just a little bit different than a lot of the teams that they've played thus far. So Penn State averaged 4.8 yards per carry. SMU only had 5 tackles for loss. On the other side, SMU averaged 4.7, but also had a couple of huge plays that really helped that kind of bump up. Not necessarily quite as good of a run day as it seems on that. And then 11 tackles for loss for Penn State. They were dominant. It was absolute domination, especially at the line of scrimmage, and that's what you kind of expected out of this game, and that's exactly what you got. And then they kept Kevin Jennings home. It's something that we've talked about on here with Anthony, my guy in the chat. We've talked about it a lot, where he said, essentially, if they keep him at home, if they keep his legs out of this thing, they're not going to win. I fully agreed with him. That's exactly what they did. The long carry of 6 yards is not going to be nearly enough to beat a team like Penn State. So remarkable stuff from this Penn State team, defense, especially that front seven to keep him at bay. And they move on. They find their way into a Fiesta Bowl matchup against Boise State. It's going to be a very, very fun talking points as we head into that one. I'll leave it there for the time being. We will get into that one on Friday. For SMU, remarkable season. It was really, really incredible to watch this team. They jumped into the ACC, rode it all the way to Charlotte, came a little bit short in Charlotte, and you were outmatched in this one. It was just showed. There was no real debate about that. It was pretty clear from the jump. This was not SMU's day. It was probably not going to be SMU's day going into it. But I had a little bit of wishful thinking on this. Wanted this one to be a little bit closer because I love SMU, love Kevin Jennings. It wasn't going to happen. I hate to say it, but Penn State was able to handle business the way that they probably should have in this game, and they move on to play Boise State in a game that they're probably going to be favored by more than they were in this one. So a lot of different things to pull out of those two games. Obviously, blowouts. Let's be totally honest. No, Ohio State was lopsided, but those were very, very lopsided performances. Notre Dame, while they only won by 10, they won by more than about 24. That was about the number that I kind of have around that game. And then Penn State, was just domination from start to finish. Obviously not what we wanted from those two games, and we'll get into that in a couple of segments. But we got 2 more games to get to. We got to talk about Texas just running over Clemson. We got to talk about Ohio State and what happened there. We'll talk about it here in a second after this break, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the two blowouts to start the weekend. Now we got to get to the two blowouts that ended the weekend. And we'll start with that Texas-Clemson game. And this was really remarkable in a lot of different levels from Texas, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. And there were some different things that kind of came up throughout this game that were a little bit more vintage Texas. A couple little mistakes here. One time where they got down to the 5-yard line, had to settle for a field goal. They were incredible in this game. They went 4 for 5 when they got into the red zone. The run game got almost to 300 yards on the day. Quinn Ewers had one pick that was just an outright drop from DeAndre Moore. Should not be on his stat sheet, but that's a totally different conversation for a different day. But at the end of the day, really impressive stuff from this offense that had left a lot to be desired over the last little bit. They have left a lot on the table, but at the end of the day, they showed up in a huge way in this game. Were really remarkable. Third out of the last 4 weeks where they've been really incredible in the run game. The one in between against Georgia was a problem, and that's something that will definitely be a huge talking point if they get to that place where they have to face off against them in that same building in that national title, and actually where they're heading this next time against Arizona State here in a minute. But on the other side of the ball, we got to talk about what Cade Klubnik did in this game, because he was incredible. Pretty much throughout this game, he was really, really incredible. The only couple of times that he was kind of kept under wraps was because the defensive line of Texas got there and they made plays on him and got him on the ground. When they didn't, he was making every play on the field. Went for 336 on a defense that hadn't given up over 350 total yards in the entire year. 3 touchdowns, only 1 pick on a tipped ball at the line of scrimmage that Colin Simmons made a ridiculous play on. And then TJ Moore was absolutely remarkable. 9 catches, 116 yards, and 1 touchdown. Something to think about as we go on the rest of the way. This Texas secondary has been absolutely locked down for most of the season. They got exposed just a little bit on Saturday, and it's something to watch as we move forward. I'm not sure if Arizona State can exploit it the same way Cade Klubnik and Clemson can. I know for a fact that Oregon and Ohio State can. So a couple of different things to think about as we move forward, especially that Malik Muhammad matchup with TJ Moore. That was a tough one for him. Very talented kid. I'm sure he will bounce back in the next matchup. He's been incredible all year, but definitely something to watch as we move forward throughout this tournament. But it started with the Texas run game. It was really, really incredible to watch. In fact, Trey Wisner and Jaden Blue, as of right now, are the 2 leading rushers in the CFP. They're on the same team. Trey Wisner went for 110, 2 scores on 15 carries, didn't even play the fourth quarter. Jaden Blue put on a show. He was 146, 14 carries, a blazing 77-yard run and 38-yard run. And if that run game keeps rolling and that defense is playing that defense's football, watch out. This team might just go on to win the national title. They might just go on to roll to a national title in some respects. But at the end of the day, I do want to kind of harp on this play in particular, and really both the 77 and 38-yard touchdown runs. Something was said after the game by Steve Sarkisian that I thought was fascinating. Apparently, going into those plays, that was an audible. It was an audible call by Quinn Ewers as he looked at the front and decided, we're going to have to run off tackle here, we're going to have to run a more power concept, whatever that is. I'm not necessarily the football mind to be asking about that, but he made an audible at the line of scrimmage after seeing the alignment from the defense, handed the ball off to Jaden Blue and let him fly. That is why Quinn Ewers is the starting quarterback of this team. That is why he's the guy that trots out there every time. That's why Arch Manning, as talented as he is, and you can make the argument that he is more talented than Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers understands the game of football better than Arch Manning right now. He understands this offense better than Arch Manning does right now, and it showed even when he's not throwing the ball. He makes the difference in this game, and he did on those 2 runs. Jaden Blue's not running through that gap if Quinn Ewers does not make the change, and that was the difference in this game in a lot of different ways. So for Clemson, the run game was rough. Phil Maffa left early, and Texas just swarmed. Outside of the 41-yard run from Adam Randall, who was a wide receiver they had to throw in there at running back a couple of times, Clemson ran for 35 yards on 23 carries. It was absolute domination from that Texas D-line, something that a lot of us expected going in, but they really controlled this game pretty much from start to finish. But the big play was the defensive stand at the goal line. It was the exact same thing that happened in A&M Texas, and I don't know why people do it. I got to be totally honest with you. At this point, do not run into the meat of that defense. Do not run into Bill Norton and Jermaine Lole and Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton. You are not going to win that battle. Just plain and simple. You are not going to win that battle against that defense. You got to get more creative. You got to get under center first. If you're going to take a shotgun snap out of that you're screwed from the get-go. But at the end of the day, remarkable stand from Texas. They just continue to make big defensive plays, and that was the difference. They probably had their worst defensive performance of the year. They made just enough plays. But huge shout-out to Clemson. When Texas scored to go up 18 going into half, you felt like that was kind of a knockout punch, but Clemson kept battling back. They needed a big play from Texas to kind of wrap this thing up, and they did just that. But why Texas was able to win, I mean, it was the run game. It was the same reason that they've been able to win a lot of these games down the stretch of the season is this run game has taken over. 292 carries, 6.1 yards per carry. Trey Wisner and Jaden Blue over 110 on the day. They controlled this game from start to finish at the line of scrimmage, and huge shout out to a number of those linemen because you had Jake Majors, your starting center, 3-year starter, hugely important guy, go out early in this game. You had your right tackle, Cam Williams, go out very early in this game, and there was some shuffling that had to happen. They played incredible after that. It was really incredible from Trevor Gooseby. It was really awesome from all the guys that kind of found their way into this lineup. That Texas offensive line room is as deep as there is in the country and gives you a good idea of why they're not super worried about what they have going into next year. They got Trevor Gooseby, they got Cole Hudson, they got plenty of guys that are going to be ready to roll going into 2025, and it really showed on Saturday. And then big defensive plays. This was the worst defensive performance of the year for Texas. No question about it. And it was because they played the best quarterback and pass game that they've played all year, pretty much point blank. So that was kind of the reality of this game. They made huge plays. They made a couple of huge sacks. They got the goal line stand. They got the pick to go up by a couple of scores. A lot of things that maybe it wasn't the prettiest game, but bend don't break works in a lot of different respects, especially when you run the football like they're going to be able to. Bend don't break works plenty fine for a defense. And then composure. This was a game that if you are 2 years in the past of the Steve Sarkisian era, if you're even, 1 year in the past possibly, Texas might lose this game. They have been known to let a lot of people back into this game, and they did for Clemson for a little bit. It was a one-score game with about 7 minutes left, and then all the momentum hit when Jaden Blue had that 77-yard touchdown run, the goal line play, everything was coming up Texas the rest of the way, but a lot of composure for this team that last year kind of lacked that, just at different times throughout the year, would let teams back into games in the second half and make it a little bit closer than they had to. They were able to handle this one, make it maybe a little bit closer, but not too bad in this one. And then where do they go from here? One of my biggest takeaways from this weekend, beyond, who won and what the next matchup is and all of that type of stuff, Clemson's going to be a problem in 2025. I think Cade Klubnik will be back. I know TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco will be back on the outside, including Antonio Williams. I know for a fact that TJ Parker is going into his junior year, as is Peter Woods. It's going to be a problem. This is going to be a really, really good football team. Sammy Brown holding down the interior. You have Ashton Hampton on the outside. This is going to be a really good football team. Clemson is not going anywhere. Going into this game, I was a little bit worried this might be kind of a swan song for Clemson at the top level of college football. After watching this game, there's no doubt in my mind that Clemson's going to be a problem in 2025 and going forward. No doubt about that, especially as they dip their toe into the transfer portal pool. For Texas, you find your way right back to the stadium that you just left. Over there in Atlanta, you're going to have to go back there, play Arizona State, and them against Cam Scadaboo, against that defensive line for Texas. It's just going to be two Rams going at each other. I actually posted that on Twitter yesterday, but the reality is it's going to be incredible to watch that game. Two very hard-nosed teams that want to get after each other. It's going to be a lot of fun. Two great offensive minds in that one as well. Tennessee, Ohio State. This was it. This was the reason that everyone going into this season said if Ohio State gets the play that they expect to get from Will Howard, they are not going to be touched. They are the best team in the country. They will run away with this season if they were able to sustain that throughout the entire year. Obviously, they weren't. They stumbled at Oregon. They played the terrible game against Michigan. But this is it. This is the team. This is the Ohio State team that what they're capable of being is this. They're capable of beating a Tennessee team by 25 points. They're capable of playing the next game against Oregon and winning by double digits. They're capable of playing Texas in the semifinal and winning by double digits. And they're capable of going to the national title and winning by double digits. That's how good this team can be. They have missed the mark throughout the year, and I am worried that maybe this was all the momentum going in their direction, all the energy going in one direction, and then you get to the end of this game and you're thinking, okay, we did our job. And now you got to move forward and play the best team in the country. So there is a little bit of worry about that. We'll talk about that probably on Friday when we take an early look at these games. But this team played angry. it was incredible to watch. The last 3 weeks, they have been taking all of it in. They have been taking all of the shit, all of the trash that people have been talking. I apologize for that, but they've been hearing all of it. They've been hearing everything that people have been saying. They've been hearing everything, saying they're soft, saying they're not ready for the moment, saying Tennessee's just going to be able to bully them, and they bully Tennessee right back. This offensive line, oh my goodness, incredible work from all the guys that had to fill in through the last couple of weeks. They just took the best defensive line in the country, in my opinion, and manhandled them for 4 quarters. Plain, period, end of story. And the offense did a lot to help them, no doubt about that. Chip Kelly, you just called your best game at Ohio State by a mile. It was really incredible to watch what he was able to do in this game. Got them out on the edge very quickly, allowed their offensive line to get a couple of blocks that were relatively easy. When you have to get the ball out of your hands very quickly, you don't have to block for quite as long. It definitely did help this offensive line throughout this game to stay fresh, to get going, and to do all the things they had to do. And Will Howard was incredible in this game. 24 for 29, 311 passing, 2 touchdowns, 1 INT that probably should have been PI in the back of the end zone. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to take anything away from Tennessee in this game. They didn't get too much, so I'm going to give them what they got. But at the end of the day, remarkable stuff from Will Howard, remarkable stuff from Chip Kelly, and this entire offense. That's what it is. That's what this offense is capable of being if you throw the ball to number 4 and throw it to him a lot. 6 catches, 103 yards, and 2 scores. Ridiculous. And then this guy, and the defensive line in particular for Ohio State, it was just mean. They only got 4 sacks on the day, but they harassed Nico. He was running for his life pretty much the entire game. He was the only thing in the offense really rushing that was working at the end of the day for Tennessee in this one, was him just scrambling for his life in a lot of different respects. They dominated. And this guy in particular, you could feel it. Going into that game, he was talking a little bit of trash to the Tennessee players going into the tunnel, and he definitely showed it up. He definitely backed it up when he got on that field. Really remarkable win from Ohio State. Remarkable from Ryan Day to get those guys off the mat and get these guys ready to roll. And that's what that team can be. When they play, when they hit all the cylinders, when they play their football game and they play it without any question, that's who they can be, and that's how dominant they can be against some of the elite teams in this country. Why Ohio State won? It was the Will Howard show. It was incredible to watch this guy play football. Probably the best game that I've ever seen him play, outside of maybe that Big 12 championship when they were able to knock off TCU. That was a remarkable game. That was as gritty of a game that I've ever seen. This was awesome. 24 for 29, 311, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. The dude was incredible. He made a big throw after big throw. Him and Chip Kelly were in lockstep throughout this game, and it looked like the quarterback that a lot of Ohio State fans that have been waiting for at different times this year. They've seen it in flashes, but this is the guy that you wanted to get in the portal. This is the guy that you got, and this is the guy that he is capable of being. Then sticky coverage. Tennessee was, I can't imagine they got more than a yard of separation on any of the routes on Saturday, because Nico, he did his best. I'll be totally honest with you. I'm not even here to trash Nico. He did not have his best game. I believe went 14 for 31. That's just the reality when you're playing this back end and they're playing that good of football. So overall, it was one of those games where there weren't windows to throw into. There wasn't a ton of run game, especially after Dylan Sampson went down, which was a huge thing in this game. But overall, the biggest thing in this game was Ohio State wasn't losing. Plain and simple. When they got off that bus, they were not losing this game because they played angry pretty much from the jump. There was a moment there entering halftime where it was 21-10. You're thinking, if Tennessee can come out in the second half, score a quick touchdown, maybe this thing can get interesting. Ohio State did not have that. They scored 3 straight touchdowns. They absolutely buried them, and that was pretty much it. They played angry pretty much from start to finish. The O-line won the day when I didn't think they were going to. That was almost possible, if I'm being honest. The D-line dominated, and Ohio State played the Ohio State football that I've been waiting for them to play pretty much the entire year, which is essentially just find number 4, find number 2, get the ball to them as quickly as possible and let them do their thing. They are remarkable players. There's not a corner in the country that is going to be able to match up with Jeremiah Smith every single down of the game. Just attack it. Just attack every single one-on-one matchup that you have with that kid. He's going to come up with more plays than you would think, and he's an alien. That's the best way to describe him. He's an absolute alien. He is not of this world, and it is remarkable to watch that kid play some football. But where do you go from here? I think for Tennessee, it's going to be a different team next year. There's no doubt about that. Dylan Sampson will make his way to the NFL, as will James Pierce Jr., as will a couple of the interior guys like Bryson Eason, maybe Omari Thomas. They're going to lose some guys. They're going to have a ton of different things to kind of move around this year, but I think Nico's going to be a whole lot better next year. I think he's a very, very good player. I think he's a guy that ceiling is just about as high as anyone in the country. I think he's going to be so much better next year that they're going to be a contender in 2025. Can't promise that they'll be, one of the 10-2 teams that makes it out of the mess or be one of the 9-3 teams that was in the mess, but at the end of the day, they will be firmly in the mix next year, and I think Nico is going to be one of the stories of the college football season next year. Oh, excuse me. And then Ohio State, we got to talk about them real quick. This was it. If they play at that level the rest of the way, they are winning the national title. I will say that with my chest. I have no hesitation saying that. And now they get a chance to go down to Pasadena and play the team that was one of the only teams that beat them this year. If they can avenge that loss, move on to the semifinals, and really be feeling good about where they are going forward, things could get really, really fun down there in Columbus, and a lot of the pressure will be taken off Ryan Day's shoulders. Obviously, there's still a good amount of pressure here. In fact, it sounds more and more as we get further away from this game. Even if they lost, he probably wasn't going to be fired, so you better be happy that you won. But at the end of the day, it was one of those games that you're just waiting and waiting and waiting for that Ohio State team to show up that's in your head. That was it. That was the team that I thought was going to show up throughout this entire season. They showed up on Saturday. If they keep showing up that way, that's your national title winner. Crazy as it sounds after a weird last week, this could be very well be the national title winner this year if they play to that level. And just to give you an idea of where I'm at, 2-2 against the spread, 3-1 straight up so far. Tennessee, you let me down. There's nothing else to say. Ohio State came in and just absolutely railroaded you throughout that game. You let me down, but that's okay. We'll move on to the next week. We'll see what we can do in the quarterfinals. But remarkable games. Two games that, didn't necessarily give us everything that we wanted, but it did give us a Texas team that looks like they're finding themselves offensively, looks like a team that can win a national title playing that offense. We found an Ohio State team that is playing to their potential, and that's a scary potential for everyone else in the country. So a lot of great things that came out of this weekend, but now we got to move forward. We've been running a little bit long here, but we got to talk about some of the issues in the CFP. There's a lot of people talking, and there's a lot of people saying things that just aren't true by any means, but we'll get into them right after this. We'll talk about all of this and why Kirk Herbstreit called me a fringe fan yesterday. We'll talk about all of it right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the games that happened this past weekend. Obviously, not quite what we wanted, and it has stirred a lot of conversation around some of the issues that we are facing with the CFP, some criticism that have popped up. And what's going on, Anthony? Nice to see you around here. But the question that has been going around is, did the wrong teams get in? Did we allow Indiana, did we allow SMU in because we were just being nice, just because we were just being cool to them? No. I'll leave it at that for the time being. And before I start this, I just want everyone to understand. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I went to the University of Georgia. I have grown up watching SEC football. I think the SEC is the best conference in the country. I think it has been that way for a long time. I think it was still that way this year. Let's start it with that, and we'll get into the rest of this for the remainder of the time. But there were a lot of people talking, and there were a lot of people talking about the issues with the first round games, how they weren't close enough, there were too many blowouts, this, that, and the other. And a lot of that I understand. I get it. I didn't get what I wanted from this weekend. I wanted SMU to put up a better fight. I wanted Indiana to put up a better fight. I wanted Tennessee, Ohio State to be one of the classic games of this entire tournament. This is what we have. Everyone that asked for a 12-team playoff, this is what you were going to get, plain and simple. When you add more teams to a table in a format that when you go back to the 4-team playoff, go ahead and look at those results, because we saw a 31-0 win over when Michigan State got beat by 31-0 over Alabama. We saw Joe Burrow to put up 7 touchdowns against Oklahoma in a first round. We saw Georgia bury Michigan in the first round of 2021. This happens. This is what the first round of the playoff has been since its inception, and then we just added more teams and acted like that was going to go away. We acted like that was just not going to be a part of the conversation anymore. These blowouts, these teams that might be a little bit better than some other teams in some other conferences, all of that stuff. I absolutely plays into this thing, and I didn't get what I wanted from this past weekend. I wanted more interesting games, but this idea that certain teams didn't belong because they played poorly on Saturday is just not true. And we'll start with Indiana here just because that's the people that people have complained about all year. Indiana was a team that was battled all year. They have done things this year that they've beat the crap out of a lot of teams that a lot of other teams just haven't. They've taken care of business where a lot of other teams just haven't. They won 11 games in a conference that last year they won 3 games in. They won 11 games in that conference, and they move in a They won 11 games while in the Big Ten. That is a playoff team. I get it. They may not be quite as talented. They might not be quite as big. They might not be quite as physical. They might not, come off the bus quite as aggressively as Alabama does. They proved more than Alabama did this year. I would sit here if this entire season played out the exact same way that it already has, I would pick the same exact 12 teams. Even knowing what I just saw on this Saturday, I'd pick the exact same 12 teams because they earned it, not because they're a big team, not because they have more 300-pounders, not because they have Ryan Williams, not because they have Walter Nolan and really talented guys on the defensive line, because they play better football throughout the year. They played more consistent football throughout the year, and yes, they played a little bit nicer of a schedule. I don't care. I'll be totally honest with you. I just don't care. That's what this sport is. Conferences are different. The SEC and the Big Ten are better than the other 2 conferences. The SEC is probably a little bit better than what the Big Ten is on a year-to-year basis. That's the world that we live in. That is what college football is. And yes, Indiana is going to get a little bit of help with their schedule. Yes, SMU is going to get a little bit of help with their schedule. But the reality of the matter is, the SEC gets a lot of help with their schedule. That's why a 10-2 Tennessee was ranked above a 11-1 Indiana, and no one said anything. That's why a 10-2 Tennessee was ranked above an 11-1 SMU at the end of the regular season, and no one said anything. And that's why Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, you're 9-3, and you're ranked above a 10-2 BYU in Miami, and no one's saying anything. The SEC gets preferential treatment. They get the benefit of the doubt. They get a little bit more leeway than a lot of these other conferences do, and I would argue they should. That is the best conference in the country. I think those teams should get a little bit of preferential treatment when it comes to that type of world. But the reality is, you lost 3 games. You lost 3 games in 2 games that you had no business losing if you're Alabama and Ole Miss, especially 2 games that you were in the field. That's the issue that I have with this entire conversation. You were in the field. As Alabama was traveling to Norman, Oklahoma, they were firmly in the field. If they had won that game, you're in the playoff. There was no question about that. You were in the playoff, and yes, Auburn could have stripped them up. Let's be totally honest. They were in the playoff if they had won that game. Ole Miss, you go to Florida. You are in the playoff. You are absolutely firmly in the playoff. There's no question about that if you're able to win out the rest of the way. And you lose. I don't have sympathy for that. I'm sorry, I just don't. I don't have sympathy for teams that want to, lose 3 games, want to play really, really poorly throughout all of the different weeks throughout the season, and then turn around and say, but we got more 300-pounders. But our guys can run a little bit faster. But our guys are a little bit more talented on the talent index. We have a better blue chip ratio. And all of that is just nauseating to me. And it goes against everything that what this sport is. And I fully understand that yes, those teams are better. I will be the first to tell you that I think Alabama would beat Indiana on neutral field. I think they would beat SMU on neutral field. Same thing for Ole Miss, same thing for South Carolina. It does not matter, is what I'm saying, because I can't prove that. What I can prove is that Alabama went to Norman, Oklahoma, got beat by 21 points while Oklahoma threw for 68 yards passing. What I can prove is that Ole Miss went to a Florida team that had just had 49 hung on them by Texas. They hung 17 and they lost. I know that stuff. I don't know that Indiana wouldn't show up against Alabama. I don't know that SMU wouldn't show up against Alabama. I can lean that direction, and I very much do. That's not what the sport is. This sport is different. This sport has conference issues. This sport has conference imbalances, and that's just something we're going to have to live with one way or the other. So there's a lot of different things that go into this, and there's a lot of different people to blame. There's a lot of different people to be mad at, including Kirk Herbstreit, and a lot of people pushing a ridiculous narrative right about now. But at the end of the day, if you want to blame anyone, if you want to be mad at anyone for all of the bad matchups that we had this weekend, for all the blowouts, for all the non-blockbuster matchups, as Paul Feinbaum wants to call them, as if this is a Netflix show. The reality is, if you want to blame anyone, blame Lane Kiffin, blame Kalen DeBoer, I don't want to say blame Shane Beamer because that's a little bit different of a situation, but at the end of the day, blame the teams that came up short. If Ole Miss was up there in Happy Valley this past weekend, probably a more interesting game. If Alabama was over in Austin, Texas this past weekend, probably a more interesting game. It doesn't matter because they came up short. They are the teams that you should be mad at. They are the teams that you should be upset about, and they are the teams that you should go after. Not the selection committee, not anyone at Indiana, not SMU. They handled their business. They played the football in front of them. The other teams didn't. That's the plain and simple truth of it. So I get the justification. I get the argument for putting Alabama in. I get the argument for putting Ole Miss in. I understand all of that. If we decide that we're just going to, at the end of the year, just say who are the best 12 teams, who are the most talented 12 teams, who are going to give us the best first round matchups, we're no longer playing college football. We're no longer giving credence to a team that went into the Big Ten, won 11 games, had their best year in a very, very long time. They deserve a shot at the table. Now, I will say, I don't think they have much of a shot. I don't think the SMUs of the world, I don't think the Indianas of the world, I don't think the Boise States of the world have a very good shot in this format. I didn't think that going in. I definitely don't think that now. It doesn't matter to me. Because the reality of the matter is this is the format that we do have, and we have to work within the parameters of what college football is, which is conferences being imbalanced, conferences having some issues, some teams getting more wins that might be a little bit worse than some teams that have some other wins. And frankly, if Alabama had 2 wins right now, if Ole Miss had 2 wins right now, they'd be in the playoff. They'd be the teams that were playing this past weekend. And yes, we might have gotten more interesting matchups, but you were given the preferential treatment. You were given every chance to get into this thing, and you laid an egg over there in Norman. You laid an egg over there in Gainesville, and I do not feel bad for you by any means, Lane Kiffin. I do not feel bad for you, Kalen DeBoer. I do not feel bad for any Alabama fans or South Carolina fans or Ole Miss fans. You had your shot, plain and simple, and these teams outperformed you throughout the year. So let's get into some of the main complaints, because I went a little bit long-winded there, got a little bit worked up this past weekend with some of the people saying just ridiculous stuff like Kirk Herbstreit saying we shouldn't get caught up with wins. I don't even know what that means. Well, what are we supposed to get caught up with? Hypothetical wins? Because that's just outright ridiculous. But overall, here are the complaints. The first round blowouts, obviously very upsetting, not what we wanted by any means. I watched Michigan State get beat by 31. I watched Joe Burrow just roll over Oklahoma. I watched Georgia bury Michigan. The first round games in the 14 playoff were domination. And that's the reality of this sport as well. I was not in favor of going to 12 teams. I was firmly in favor of going to 6 teams. I felt like that would have been the best way to have some competitive matchups throughout this thing. But the reality is, you add more teams to the mix, there is going to be disparity in these matchups. And there were huge talent disparities in these matchups because that's the reality of this sport in a lot of different respects. So the first round blowouts, I don't know what to tell you. That's just what happens in the CFP. It's happened in the 14 playoff. It's going to happen way more in the 12-team playoff. Not saying every first-round matchup will be this way, but I am saying that it gives more credence to every matchup being this way. And then you do have the wrong teams got in. Just know. I've already kind of talked about this plenty. If this college football season, if right now was the start of week 0, and we played it out the exact same way, everything happened the exact same way, and I had all the knowledge that I have after these first-round games, I'm putting the same exact 12 teams in, and I'm putting them maybe in a little bit different of an order, but I'm putting them exactly the same 12 teams, because Alabama, you would have had preferential treatment. If you didn't lose that last game, you would be in. Ole Miss, if you didn't lose that last game, you would be in. So that's the reality of our sport. It is not going to be perfect. Conference imbalances, conference realignment, all of those issues play into this, but the reality is the wrong teams did not get into this thing. The right teams got into this thing, and it played out exactly how a 12-team playoff is meant to play out in college football, just plain and simple. And then the auto buy issue. This is something that we will talk about probably on Friday a little bit more depth, and we've talked about it a number of times already, but we could have the two best teams facing off in the Rose Bowl. That's not ideal. It is the quarterfinals of this CFP, and we might have the two best teams in the country facing off in that one, which is very upsetting. It's a very fixable issue, even in 2024. Just fix that one thing, and that's actually one of the reasons to calm down here is one small tweak fixes a ton of these problems. A lot of the first-round blowouts, if we didn't have, auto buys for a lot of these teams, the first-round matchups would have been Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State, Arizona State, Tennessee, SMU, and Indiana, Boise State. I'm not saying those are the most incredible matchups in the world. I'm saying pretty confidently they would have been more competitive than the ones that we just saw, pretty much across the board. And it would reward Oregon with getting the best matchup in the second round, the winner of that Indiana-Boise State matchup. Just get rid of auto buys. That's a very, very simple fix. It's a fix that should be able to happen next year, but maybe they'll drag their feet on that as well. But overall, that's a very easy fix and one that should be able to be done pretty quickly, if I had to imagine. And then there are 7 games left, guys. I know this weekend wasn't great. We had 4 games that didn't quite live up to the billing, and that's very upsetting, no doubt about that. But the reality is, we're going to have fun games. We got 7 more games left. We got some really great matchups coming up in the quarterfinals, especially those two between Georgia, Notre Dame, and Oregon, Ohio State. We have semifinal matchups that could just be the 2 best teams in the Big Ten and 2 best teams in the SEC going at it. And then we're going to have a national title. That's going to be between 2 great teams, 2 teams that have battled all year and probably are playing really good football right around this time of year. So enjoy this. My final verdict on all of this is just everyone calm down. Everyone chill out just a little bit. Bama, Ole Miss, South Carolina fans, Lane Kiffin especially. Hush. You had your chance. You had the ability to get into this thing. You had the ability to make the run. You had the ability to jump into this thing and then to be the spoiler. Be the team that gives us really good matchups. Be the team that knocks off a Notre Dame on the road or a Penn State on the road. You missed your chance. Plain and simple. You missed your chance when you went over to Gainesville and got beat. You missed your chance when you went over to Norman, Oklahoma and got dominated. So I'm really sick of this. I'm really sick of us blaming Indiana, blaming SMU for winning football games, because that's what the sport is. You try to win as many football games as you can every single year. That's the reality of all this. So the wrong teams didn't get in. Plain and simple. Those are the 12 teams that deserve to be in this thing, and those are the 12 teams that I would put in this thing if we restarted it from right now. This is just what you're going to get in a sport that is so variable, in a sport that has so many different conferences that are better than other conferences and this, that, and the other. You're going to have blowouts. You're going to have teams that are just physically outmatched on any given day. That is going to happen one way or the other. But the reality is, just chill out. We'll find a way to fix some of these issues. Apologies, Anthony. I'll get to these here in a second. But I was not in favor of getting to the 12-team playoff because I didn't think there were 12 teams in the country that were worthy of competing for a title every single year. I still relatively feel that way. But the reality is, here we are. We have to make the best of the situation, get rid of auto buys. I think that will solve a lot of the problems that we have, at least short term. And then we can really attack this thing and see what we want to go forward with. But the reality is, Indiana won 11 games in the Big Ten. SMU won 11 games in the ACC. If we are keeping those teams out because they are not physically as talented, they're not 300 pounds, and their defensive linemen are under 300 pounds, while Alabama's are over 300 pounds, or Jalen Milroe might be a more electric quarterback than Kevin Jennings is. We're not playing college football anymore. We're not playing a sport anymore. We're just producing a TV show, and that is the furthest thing that I want for college football. So apologies, gotten a little bit of a rant there. Some people were frustrating me quite a bit this past weekend, especially Kirk Herbstreit. Just a ridiculous statement on SportsCenter last night. But a couple of different things I want to get to here from Anthony. I disagree because when you're in a conference, that doesn't mean you should get preferential treatment. I fully agree with that sentiment. I agree with the sentiment that they probably shouldn't get preferential treatment. The fact is that they do, right? The fact is that Alabama finished in the top 12. They finished above a 2-loss Miami team because of SEC, because they had that SEC moniker. Tennessee finished above a team like SMU or a team like Indiana because of that SEC moniker. So I wasn't necessarily saying I want the preferential treatment. It was more just to say they get it. They absolutely do get it over there in the SEC, and the idea that a 10-2 Alabama would have missed out is ridiculous. They would have been in. That was their power. That was their control, and there's no doubt about that. So it shows that they cares more about the conferences than actual wins and losses. And maybe, I definitely do think there are some issues with that, and I think it could have gotten worse this past weekend with the way that Indiana and SMU performed. I don't think it should get worse, but I do definitely think that there's a possibility where they lean away from some of those teams that maybe Indiana next year, they have a really similar schedule. If they go 11-1 again and you're in a similar situation, do you lean towards the SEC the next time around is something that I'm a little bit worried about as we go forward in this thing. But there's so many issues with this, and I cannot stand the committee as well. There's so many issues with this, and you go throughout all of this different stuff. I understand the upset. I understand we wanted better games. I wanted better games. I wanted this to be more interesting. I wanted people to go after each other, and I believed in a couple of these teams maybe a little bit more than I should have. The reality is the right teams got in. Plain and simple. Those are the teams that proved time and again that they deserve to be in this dance. Those are the teams that won the games that they're supposed to win, while everyone down there in the SEC was losing games left and right. I do not feel bad for Alabama. I do not feel bad for Lane Kiffin. I do not feel bad for South Carolina. You had your opening, and you missed it. And you would have gotten preferential treatment had you just lost one less game. So, more than anything, respectfully, hush. That's the best way that I can put this. Just hush. Enjoy the next 7 games that we have. Yell from the rooftops next year that Indiana shouldn't get in with an 11-1 record, and we'll do this all over again. But for the time being, enjoy the games that are in front of us. Stop talking about Indiana and SMU, please, because the reality is those teams prove time and again that they deserve a chance to compete for a national title. Did I think they have a great shot to win it? Probably not. But at the end of the day, they deserved a shot to compete for one, and they got it. Alabama, you didn't deserve a shot to compete for it because you proved time and again that you are not a team that's going to play consistent football. Same thing with Ole Miss, same thing with South Carolina. So, no, I don't feel bad for them. No, I don't think they should have been in. Yes, the right 12 teams were in this field. It's just working out the exact same way that a 12-team playoff was meant to work out in the college football world. So, that's that. I went very, very long on this segment. Apologies for that, but we got some bowl games we got to get to. Got to give some love to these bowl games as we get towards the end of this. Get a little bit of a bowl wrap up right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about all the issues with the college football playoff and how a lot of the people this past weekend made me pretty mad, including Kirk Herbstreit, including Paul Feinbaum. But at the end of the day, we move forward. We see what happens in the next round, really hoping that Arizona State and Boise State can shut some people up. But at the end of the day, Robert, you're absolutely right. This is just what the 12-team playoff was going to give you. At the end of the day, you had 4 teams. There were a lot of blowouts. You add more teams, and you're expecting closer games. I don't know what to do for you at the end of the day. So it was going to be a little bit of a rough format to start. People are very mad. We'll move forward. Just Lane Kiffin, stop tweeting. Please, just stop tweeting. But at the end of the day, we got to talk about bowl games. There's so much stuff going on with the CFP. We could talk about the CFP till the cows come home. We got to give love to bowl season. Bowl season is very, very important to me. It is very, very important to the fabric of college football, and I am not going to be one that leaves it by the wayside. So let's get into these bowl games that happened this past weekend. We'll start with the LA Bowl between UNLV and California. And when do the Hurricanes play? I believe the 28th. I could be wrong about that. I believe they're one of those Friday games as we get into maybe they're one of the Tuesday. We'll talk about that on Friday. I can promise you that. We will cover that game on Friday. I will have all of the updates that you possibly need. I believe it's the 28th against I'm cutting in and out. Can y'all hear me? I hope that's not an issue going forward. But UNLV, California, sorry. UNLV, a little bit of a rough performance passing the ball. 5 for 18 for Haj Malik Williams, 96 yards, but he scored 2 touchdowns in this one, and the defense was absolutely incredible. Both teams are kind of going into an uncertain future. Cal goes in without their spark plug at quarterback from Fernando Mendoza. You also have UNLV heading into the Dan Mullen era. We'll see how that unfolds, and 2 off-season that'll be really fascinating to watch as we move into 2025. Western Kentucky and James Madison. James Madison gets a huge win at the end of the year to salvage the season just a little bit. Kind of had a tough back end of the season, but played some really good football towards the end, and they get to 9 wins. George Pettaway, 100 yards rushing in this one. Bryce Atkins played a really good game in replacement duty. 16 for 23, 181, 1 touchdown. James Madison is the team that I think could really kick it up a notch next year. I really like what Bob Chesney is doing. Obviously, kind of a weird year, up and down, games that they probably feel like they should have won, but you keep Alonzo Barnett in that place, you keep Bob Chesney around, I think you're going to be a really, really fun team. And then Tyson Helton over there at Western Kentucky is going to have them ready to roll. They will be a player in the Conference USA going forward. Even without Caden Veltkamp walking out the door, I think they'll be more than fine. They'll find a new quarterback, and they'll keep this thing rolling. Georgia Southern fell a little bit short to Sam Houston State. This was one that I had Georgia Southern in, but at the end of the day, the Sam Houston State was able to finish the Casey Keeler era and start the Phil Longo era with a win. And as you can imagine, it was Hunter Watson. 237 total yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 on the ground, 4 INTs for this defense for Sam Houston. They were all over the place, including a pick 6 to start this game out. Really incredible stuff from Sam Houston, and it'll be interesting to watch what these two teams are going forward. Clay Helton is probably staying put over there at Georgia Southern, and if J.C. French can come back, it's going to be a really, really fun team. And then Sam Houston with Phil Longo is going to be a really fascinating thing to watch, no doubt about that. Then you have Ohio against Jacksonville State, 2 teams that won their conferences this year, and it was the Parker Navarro show. He was absolutely incredible. We talked about how good Contravion Wisner was with 110 yards for Texas. Navarro one-upped him, went for 111 yards and 3 scores on the ground. Really incredible stuff. The Ohio defense kept the Jacksonville State run game, which is very, very hard to keep under wraps. 42 yards rushing for Jacksonville State is absolutely incredible. They did hit a couple of big-time plays down the field, but if you can slow down Tyler Huff in that run game, you're going to have a lot of success. But Ohio has officially jumped into the Brian Smith era with a win. Jacksonville State, they picked up Charles Kelly yesterday. We'll talk about that a little bit more depth going forward, but going to be really interesting next year. Both teams have quite a bit coming back next year, but both will have new quarterbacks. Parker Navarro and Tyler Huff will be out the door. It'll be interesting to see what these offenses are and maybe if they change just a little bit as they go into next year. And then the one that everyone was watching just for one big-time play, Damon Watson. That was the coolest thing I've ever seen. I'll be totally honest with you. It's very lame to get that excited about it, but a 400-pounder taking a handoff is just something you love to see. But DJ Lagway was incredible in this one as well. He had a couple of mistakes that were very kind of freshman-type mistakes, but 300 yards through the air, really did a great job, and that run game was rolling against a very good Tulane defense, over 200 yards rushing, 3 INTs from Ty Thompson in this game, and didn't come at a great time because he's kind of his audition for other teams in the portal. He is making his way out, so very talented kid. I think he's going to be able to find a good place to land, but the Green Wave has picked up a couple of quarterbacks, including Donovan Leary yesterday. It'll be interesting to see what Tulane is going forward, and then Florida, they're the team to watch going forward. There's no doubt about that. For Tulane, they have John Summerall back, which is huge. If they can get Mekhi Hughes back in the mix, this is going to be a team that will compete for the American next year. Coastal Carolina and UTSA, they face off at 11 a.m., just about an hour after we get off air here, but remarkable that they're facing off this early. One quarterback will be on the field. Ethan Vasco for Coastal Carolina will be off the field. He has joined Liberty for 2025. UTSA holding on to just about everyone, at least as of right now. It looks like Owen McCown will be out there, but at the end of the day, Coastal Carolina might have the best player on the field, and Braden Bennett, very, very talented player. But UTSA might have the next 3 or 4. So I'm going to go with the Roadrunners. I'll go with Owen McCown in that one. I think it's going to be a really fun game, but I'll go with the Roadrunners there. The Idaho Potato Bowl, the famous Idaho Potato Bowl. NIU against Fresno State, two teams that played some really good football throughout this year, came a little bit short of where they wanted to be at the end of the year. NIU obviously started as the story of college football. Fresno State going into the Matt Entz era as they move into 2025. Mikey Keene, the starting quarterback for Fresno State, is in the portal, so he will not be going in this one, but neither will the other starting quarterback, Ethan Hampton, because he's in the portal as well, just decommitted from Wake Forest. We'll see where he ends up, but overall, this is going to be a very weird game with a lot of new players that you'll see, but I'm going to go with Gavin Williams. I'm going to go with that run game for NIU. I think they do enough, and I think give me the Huskies, give me the points with that as well. South Florida and San Jose State. There's two teams that I don't want to say had disappointing years, but I feel like they felt like they had more on the chip. They felt like they left a little bit of dip on the chip here because South Florida was one of those teams coming into the year that I was sky high on. Really, really love this team. Obviously had some injury troubles with Byron Brown and some different things. Bryce Archie is going to be probably starting for this game. Going to be really interesting to see how he can react to his second start. And then Nick Nash, you will not see on the other side. He is declared for the draft. He is going to move on to the next level. Very talented kid. Cannot wait to see what he does in the NFL level. I think he'll be playing there for a very long time. But as good as Nick Nash is, I still like San Jose State here. I like Floyd Chalk the fourth. I think he's going to make enough plays in the run game. I think San Jose State is able to win this one relatively comfortably at the end of the day. Very talented team, but I'm going to lean towards I'm going to lean away, I guess, from the freshman quarterback in Bryce Archie. I'll lean towards the run game that I trust just a touch more. Pitt against Toledo. This is a very interesting game. This is a game that a lot of people will look at. They'll say, okay, it's going to be Pitt, and they'll move on to the next game. Toledo's a good team. Toledo can really throw the rock around. Toledo can make a lot of big-time plays, and I think it's going to be a really, really fun one. But Pitt heads into the postseason 7-5 after a 7-0 start. It's been really tough. Eli Holstein has had some different injuries. They've had injuries really all over the field, and they've really struggled, no doubt about that. But they were a great, great story to start the year, and I think they could be a great story into 2025. As long as Eli Holstein is there, I think they have a very, very high ceiling. But I think it's going to be a really fun game between two very, very interesting offenses that like to throw the rock around. I'm going to go with the Rockets. I'll go with Toledo here. I'll go with Tucker Gleason. I'll go with Jerwan Newton. I'll go with all those guys on the outside to just play a team that's just not all the way mentally there. If I had to imagine for Pitt, I'll go with Toledo in this one to pull a little bit of an upset. Rutgers, Kansas State, and this one I'm doing a little bit of wishful thinking with. I think the status of Kyle Montague for this game is still a little bit up in the air. I'm going to say he's going to play, just to put it out in the universe, hopefully that he will hear me, he will be inclined to play. But at the end of the day, going to be a great matchup nonetheless. Two very, very fun teams. Rutgers started the year very fast, kind of tapered late. Kansas State had some kind of up and down moments throughout the year, came up just short of that Big 12 title. Very talented team nonetheless, and a very interesting team going into 2025. But in this game, going to be really, really fun to watch. This feels like a moment for Avery Johnson. This feels like a moment kind of like what Miller Moss did for USC, or kind of like what Nico did for Tennessee this past season in bowl season, where you play that really incredible game. Everything starts clicking, everything looks really, really good, and you move into 2025 feeling incredibly confident. I think DJ Giddens could run wild in this game in his final game for Kansas State. I think it's going to be a really fun one, hoping that Kyle Montague is on the field, and I think Kansas State comes out with a win. I think Avery Johnson puts on a little bit of a show in this one. And then to finish out the week, Arkansas State, Bowling Green. There's more on Friday. We will cover those on Friday. Just by the way, a couple of huge ones on Friday that I love. But at the end of the day, Arkansas State, Bowling Green. This is the last time you're going to see Harold Fannin Jr. at the college football level. Enjoy it while you can. This guy's absolutely incredible. Was second in the country in receiving yards of this year. He is so much fun to watch, and frankly, probably the easiest one of the bunch, if I'm being totally honest. Give me the Golden Eagles. Give me Harold Fannin to go absolutely crazy, even without Terrion Seward in that backfield, who is actually making his way to Virginia Tech. Great pickup for the Hokies there. They're going to be more than fine. I think Harold Fannin goes crazy. I think Bowling Green gets a win. I think they move on to the 2025 season with quite a few questions around that roster as you move forward, but that's kind of just the reality of being a group of 5 team right about now. So a couple of really remarkable bowl games that are going to be happening throughout this week. A couple of great ones on Friday that we'll break down, including Georgia Tech Vandy. That might just be my very favorite matchup of the entire thing. So going to be really, really fun to watch all of that unfold, and cannot wait to get into all of that with you all. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, do a little bit of a weekend catch-up. There was a couple of portal moves I want to make sure you guys have on y'all's radar, a couple of coaching hires that definitely are very important, and then a couple of things from the FCS playoffs that we got to get to, got to make sure we give some love down there. So we'll do that right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the bowl games. Wanted to make sure we got some love over there before we got into the CFP craziness that will be happening throughout the rest of this week. We'll be back on Friday to talk about all of that stuff, I promise you that. But also, Anthony, Miami does play on Saturday. Just wanted to make sure you had that information. They do play on Saturday at 3:30 against Iowa State. That's one that I'm really looking forward to. Love those two offenses, and I think they can get after each other pretty good. But let's get to a little bit of a weekend catch-up. A ton of stuff that has happened this past weekend. Want to make sure you guys have all of the news that we need to have, so frankly, I don't have to do a portal segment that just feels like me flying around and speaking like an auctioneer. So let's go ahead and jump into this thing, and let's start with the transfer portal here. And we'll start with the guy that has been the story of the transfer portal the last little bit. Beau Pribula has officially made his decision. He is going to be Missouri Tiger. Great pickup. I love this pickup. I think he's a guy that absolutely can be the starter right away. We'll give them a little bit more dual threat than what Brady Cook gave them, but he gave them a little bit, but definitely will open that offense a little bit more. Still some things that need to happen out there. They still got get replacements for Theo Weiss, for Luther Burden, which are going to be very tall orders. They still got some things to figure out, no doubt about that, on the offensive side of the ball, but you have your piece, and now you can build around this guy. Very, very talented guy, and I think he's someone that could really play really good football at the SEC level next year. Cam Skattebo, your replacement has been found. Don't you worry. Kanye Udo is coming into Arizona State. Talk about a culture shock. This guy's going to go from West Point, from going to Army Academy, to finding his way all the way down to Tempe. Man, I got to follow this kid for the next year because he's going to change quite a bit if I had to imagine. But the reality is, on the football field, he's going to be a household name in 2025. This is one of my favorite running backs in the entire country. He was highly recruited coming out of high school, decided to go to Army. Remarkable kid, remarkable player, and absolutely is someone that I think maybe won't be Cam Skattebo level, because that's absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely can fill some of that void and be a very, very talented player for Arizona State. Isaiah Horton, a guy that we fully expected to come off the board, has officially come off the board. A huge piece added to that Alabama wide receiver room. Not a huge surprise here, but Ryan Williams and Isaiah Horton, along with Jeremy Bernard, along with a couple of the other guys they're bringing in, it's going to be a really fun group. I'll just leave it at that. It feels like a group that's a little bit closer to what Washington had a year ago, and we saw what happened then. So going to be a really fun year for Bama, and it didn't stop there. This was a very fun weekend for Bama. Cam Dewberry, a very talented offensive lineman. This is the guy you get to slide in for Tyler Booker. This is the guy that slides into that left guard position, tries to hold it down. Obviously, Tyler Booker might just be an alien and not of this world, so going to be big shoes to fill, no doubt about that, but a very talented kid here, definitely a guy that can make a huge impact, and I assume will be an almost immediate starter over there at Bama. Deuce Robinson, huge pickup in the wide receiver portal. Florida State gets this one, and they needed it very, very bad. They needed that big-time wide receiver. They lost Johnny Wilson. You lost a little bit of that ability on that offensive side of the ball. we got a 6'6" kid coming in. So don't you worry. You got a big guy coming in. That's Mike Norvell's bread and butter. I think it's going to be a great pickup. I think this kid could be an absolute star in 2025 as long as they figure out a couple of the other issues, especially along that offensive line for Florida State. The biggest name on the market came off the board this morning. Auburn has officially gotten their guy, the elite wide receiver from Georgia Tech, the number 1 wide receiver in the portal before he came out. And that wide receiver group for Auburn, it's going to be really fun to watch. Him, Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson. I don't know if Keandre Lambert-Smith has one more year. I think he might, so it could be ridiculous. It could be a truly, truly remarkable group on the back end there. A lot of stuff still to figure out with that offense, with Hugh Freeze in particular. We'll have to figure that out with time, but this is a talented kid. Definitely adds to what I think about Auburn going into next year. Over to USC and over to Eugene for Bear Alexander. He is making his way up to Oregon. If this kid keeps his head on straight, he's a star. If this kid can show up every single day and go to work, if he can block out all of that stuff and just go to practice, work your butt off, make sure that you're ready to go every Saturday. He is a first-round NFL draft pick. He has not quite hit at a number of different places, and I'm a little bit worried that it might go the same way this time. If he can buckle down, this kid is a star, and it's making me a little bit frustrated that he hasn't quite done that yet. But at the end of the day, maybe Oregon's the right fit. I know him and Dan Lanning were very close when he was at Georgia. Hopefully, that kind of zeroes him in, gets him very focused, and if it does, everybody else watch out in the Big Ten. And USC's done a great job already backfilling with Keyshawn Silver and Jamal Jarrett, very talented guy from Georgia. So USC's doing a little bit better job on the portal trail right about now. Sadir Mitchell, the move to LSU is now officially official. I don't think anyone was really questioning this one. This one was going to happen one way or the other. It just officially happened this past weekend. Really remarkable player. Absolutely will be a huge piece for that defensive line and reunites with his old coach in Bo Davis. Makes total sense. They also added Braylon Moore to that offensive line from Virginia Tech. Huge get. This might be one of the bigger gets of the entire LSU cycle thus far. Has been absolutely remarkable at Virginia Tech, and we'll have to slide in for a very, very talented player on the interior. Patrick Payton, you're making your way down there to Baton Rouge. This edge rushing group is going to be one of the best in the country, maybe the best in the country, and this guy in particular. This guy with Kevin Peoples and Blake Baker, ooh buddy, he's going to do some special things. I'm just going to be totally honest with you guys. He could end up being a top 10 pick this next year because him and that defense just feels like a match made in heaven. I think he's going to be a problem. Then you got Deion Hayes. He did an incredible job at Colorado this year, setting the edge, was a very, very talented player for them. He's making his way down to College Station now. Very, very good pickup for the Aggies. Probably a little bit more of a supplemental piece, but this is a guy that's just continued to get better throughout his career. Would not be surprised if he was a huge player for A&M in 2025. Staying with the Colorado team, Nikhil Hill-Green making his way to Tuscaloosa. So a couple of guys from Colorado to the SEC. Not the worst recruiting pitch, as crazy as that sounds, not the worst recruiting pitch for Colorado going forward, but another buff that was absolutely incredible this year. I think he's going to be a starter for Alabama next year with a lot of those two big-time linebackers walking out the door. They're going to need to backfill, and I think this is a great piece to backfill with. One of my favorite linebackers in the country, Jacob Manu, is making his way up to Washington to reunite with his former head coach. Very talented kid, and especially with Carson Bruner walking out the door, you need someone to hold down the interior or the middle of that defense. This is going to be your guy. Very talented kid, leading tackler, I believe, the last 2 years for Arizona. Really, really good player. Absolutely will be a big-time piece for Washington next year. And then Tyrese Fearby. This is just a guy I love. I'll be totally honest with you. He has a relentless motor. He flies around the field. He plays so hard. And he's making his way up to Madison, Wisconsin now. I love what Wisconsin's doing in the portal because they're not going outside their means. They're not acting like they're Alabama. They're not acting like they're Ohio State. They are all Wisconsin. Some of the things that they can do are not the same things that a lot of the other teams can do out there. But the reality is they've done an incredible job picking up the guys that they need. They've upgraded all over the place. I think this kid could be an absolute star for them in 2025. And then you got the top available transfer. Zachariah Branch is still on there. Sounds like Georgia could be heating up there. Dane Key, it just feels like a formality of when he commits to Georgia at this point, if I'm being honest. Takario Davis, I expect to go to the NFL draft at the end of all this, so He's in there. He's probably not really in there, if I'm being honest. Max Clare has gone a little bit quiet over the last little bit. Definitely a huge piece for someone. Texas, Louisville, Texas A&M, a lot of teams in for him. Jonte Cook was down in Gainesville this past weekend. Looks like he wants to play the Longhorns in 2025. No surprise there, and it seems like it could be Gainesville where he ends up, which is a ridiculous wide receiver group that we will talk about in time for sure. And then we got other updates. Coaching updates. Steve Belichick has officially been hired over there at UNC. He will join them after the bowl game for Washington. He's done a great job over there at Washington. 27th in the country in yards allowed per game with 324. UNC last year was 377 and then gave up 22.9 points per game. UNC gave up 28.2 per game. So it is going to be an upgrade. They need a little bit more talent on that group, but there's plenty of talent in that UNC group already. It's going to be really interesting to see what the effects of this hire is. And then you got a couple more hires to make. Still, the OC position is very much open. And the thing that I'll be watching probably most closely over the next year or so, how involved is Steve Belichick in recruiting? Because if he's the guy that's kind of heading that, if he's the guy that's kind of leaning into that, he's probably going to be your head coach in waiting. If he's a little bit more on the coaching side of things and let everyone else handle stuff, he still could be the head coach in waiting, but I would lean towards, just watching what he does on the recruiting trail. I think that could be kind of the moniker to give you an idea of what the future holds after Bill Belichick walks out of Chapel Hill. Charles Kelly has been officially hired at Jacksonville State. I believe we only have a couple more on the board in terms of opening jobs right about now. So huge hire here. I think he's a great coach. He was a co-defensive coordinator, safeties coach for Auburn. He spent all his life in Alabama. He has been all over Alabama. He's been coaching, I believe, since the 80s or so. Remarkable coach. Absolutely a guy that's going to make a huge difference for this team, and I think it kind of cut from the same cloth of Rich Rod. So really like this hire, and he's going to have all of the recruiting power and connections that you're possibly going to need over there. Norfolk State has hired Michael Vick as their new head coach. This is not one I saw coming. I thought this was one where you throw it out just to get people talking about Norfolk State, and then you make your real hire. They hired him. I'm very surprised. I can't sit here and say that I think it's going to work. I'll be totally honest with you. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch, and I'm more than happy to be along for the ride. It'll be really awesome if it does work, but I don't know. This one just does not feel fully right to me for whatever reason. We'll see what happens with it, but definitely something that's going to be another fascinating storyline in the coaching world heading into 2025. And then the FCS playoff. We got to give some love to the FCS this time of year. We got a little bit of time to give some love to the FCS, so why not? So South Dakota State, North Dakota State, this one was fun. It was really back and forth. If you hated the Penn State SMU game, you might as well have flipped over to this one because it was awesome. A ridiculous one-handed catch from Bryce Lance, who is Trey Lance's brother. 3 touchdowns, 125 yards on the day. With 4 minutes left in the game, he made a huge catch. That was it. That was incredible play by him. Cam Miller was awesome. 4 touchdowns, 272 total yards. The dude was incredible pretty much all day. Cam Miller is absolutely incredible to watch. And North Dakota State makes their way back to another title. South Dakota State stole it from there for a couple of years, but the big dogs are back. They're trying to get that first title in a couple of years after they went, I think, 9 straight after the last 3 or 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. But remarkable win here. They move on. They're going to play touchdown Tommy Mellott. They're going to play Montana State in the championship game, and the show of Tommy Mellott just continues to roll on. 259 yards, 3 touchdowns for Montana State. They move to 15-0 on the year with 1 more on the line. Can they do it? It's going to be a really fun game over on January 6th. We will be breaking that one down in full. Got to give some love to the FCS this time of year, but that Cam Miller against Tommy Mellott matchup at quarterback, cannot ask for much more. That's going to be so much fun to watch in that FCS championship game. But that'll do it. This was a crazy weekend. It was absolutely all over the place. People were calling people casuals, calling people fringe fans for just believing that wins should matter. A million things happened this past weekend, but at the end of the day, we have come to an end of this show. We will be back on Friday to break down early looks at the first round games. We'll look at the transfer portal. We'll look at some other questions. Maybe some other people have complaints by then. it's the world of college football. A million different things could happen. But we will be back on Friday to update you on everything you need to know. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We got great people covering every single sport you could possibly need. So come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But I will be back on Friday. Enjoy Christmas, enjoy your families, and then we'll talk about all the craziness on Friday. We'll get into those quarterfinal games. But thank you for tuning in, and I will see you guys on Friday.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.